Psykers are among some of the strongest beings in the Warhammer world, are able to accomplish terrifying as well as wondrous feats, like folding a fitted bedsheet without saying the word fuck once. The Emperor, Magnus, Malkador the Sigillite, there's a number of these psychic titans throughout the timeline of 40k. And for this video, we're going to talk about the top 5 strongest Psykers. Now, we have to set our kind of ground rules here to make this more interesting. First, no Primarchs, demons, gods, or individuals that are dead. So that kind of wipes the big 3 that we just talked about from this list. I'll be honest, this was pretty painstaking, and it's really open to so much conjecture and so much opinion that this list is simply my list. You can float these names all over a top 10 list and still not get 100% agreement. But before we dive in, I want to give you guys an idea for how confusing the Psykers are in 40k. The Imperium has a 24-point scale, the assignment, in which they measure and categorize Psykers based on their abilities. Now, this isn't really an accurate scale because people can fluctuate throughout this scale in their lives, and their abilities are unquantifiable on the top end. More importantly, these scales typically deal more with destructive abilities versus divination or telekinetic powers, as the point of the assignment is a classification to determine the threat to the Imperium, not a means of proper categorization. Most classifications have 2 grades within them, but the system itself is just confusing as fuck, and I'm discussing this so you guys get a real good idea of how these psychic levels work. So, start with our top one here, Alpha Plus, the strongest of the strong. And this category has no top end, and really there's a variance of power levels within this category. I mean, you have the Emperor in here, as well as Magnus the Red, even the other more notable psychic Primarchs. So this is a much more of a spectrum than a simple classification. You'd find greater demons up in this piece as well, and all sorts of other beings. And that's why we're really not going to focus on this category so much, as they're more akin to a psychic nuclear missile than a conceivable, quantifiable number. And as I've said, Psykers in general are really hard to rank, quantify, and categorize outside of their awareness of their abilities. Alpha Beta, this is the meat and potatoes of where we're going to be spending or hanging out at the most. And moreover, most of the more iconic and big names in the Warhammer 40,000 universe hang out at this level. And for the sake of this video, we're mainly drawing from the Alpha pool, while most librarians are in the Delta Beta pool to kind of give you a frame of reference for scale. So Delta and Gamma, this is where the lion's share of the Imperium Psykers are drawn from. Astropaths, Imperial Military Psykers, etc. Most Psykers don't really progress beyond this level because they don't really feel the need to really, and typically only learn one psychic discipline. Zeta and Epsilon, now we're getting into the common Psykers, with Epsilon having a more structured take on their psychic abilities, and they're starting to harness their abilities. Zeta being both the most common and most dangerous. Demon possession is prime in Zeta Psykers because they're mainly kind of unaware, or not necessarily unaware, but unable to control their power. Think Harry Potter before he discovers he's a wizard, or Force sensitive before he's inducted to the Jedi Order. Iota, Theta, and Eta, the Imperial batteries as I like to call them, and these Psykers are the ones that get carted off in black ships to feed the Golden Throne. They're conscious of they have like some sort of psychic abilities, but it's very minimal and usually fringe psionic talents. So they're the last distinction of true Psykers. Now, Omicron, Xi, Nu, Mu, Lambda, Kappa, they're barely above normal human levels. I mean, think of these as people like smugglers in the Star Wars, which are sometimes discovered to be Force sensitives, where their Force sensitivity makes them think they have an air of good luck about them. So, kind of freak occurrences, really. Rho and Pi are your kind of normal base humans. They're nothing special, just you and me. And Sigma and Tau, the assignment describes these as kind of psionically dense individuals, in the sense that they really can't be hindered by most of the random whims of the warp that people might experience in, say, interstellar travel and such. Upsilon, Phi, Chi, Psi. Now, these bros are varying levels of immune to the warp's bullshit. I mean, always calling at 1 a.m. Nah, warp, I ain't up anymore, so I'm trying to fuck. And they've got Omega. Now, these guys are the scary ones. They're psychic blanks, so your pariahs, your untouchables, your sisters of Scion, people that are immune to the warp's influence, but also project a field of psi negativity that negates Psykers' abilities. Truly horrifying to people like the Thousand Suns. Then lastly, Omega Minus, reserved for this Lexus Temple of Assassins, which use special abilities to further enhance their normal Omega status. So they use special equipment and special training. And they destroy people with these kind of massive psychic blasts to the face. Mind lasers everywhere. Let's dive on in here to our list, starting off with our first one. And that is number 5, the Hivemind. One of the biggest hurdles of this list is that I didn't want to just fill it with nothing but Imperial, or for that matter, human Psykers. And it makes sense to then talk about easily the largest living Psyker on this list. I know a lot of people think Doom of Malantai should be on its own thing, but everything is part of the Tyranid whole, despite the fact that it was a Zoanthrope that devoured the psychic energy of an entire craft world, which in turn fed the big boy himself, because that's my point here. This guy is monstrous. Now, the Hivemind in and of itself isn't known for these incredible feats of Psyker abilities, like crushing an aluminum can with their bare hands. Imagine that. Crazy, right? Instead, the Hivemind is able to control millions, if not billions or trillions of organisms at one time. In addition, creatures like Zoanthropes, Broodlords, Terravigons, there's such a stupid name, Hive Tyrants and the such are channeling their psychic abilities through the Hivemind itself. So in fact, the entire race of Tyranids is psychic to some degree, as they're part of the greater gestalt consciousness of the Hivemind itself. And I mean, Termagants and Hormagaunts have no ability to conceive, matter, reason, or think. I mean, they're purely instinctual creatures. They rely on the synaptic messages conveyed by synapse creatures of the swarm, and by that extension, the Hivemind. The synapse creatures act as kind of satellites that sort of amplify the Wi-Fi signal of the Hivemind, so that Becky in her Uggs isn't screaming in the back of Starbucks going, "What's the Wi-Fi password?" The Hivemind is actually pretty horrifying too. It's this Cthulhu-esque cosmic monstrosity. If you know nothing of the Tyranids, or Tyranids, whatever you want to call them, I like Tyranids, you should know that they're a massive race of these bioconstructs that are born out of gigantic Tyranid broth that is the broiled down matter of planets, people, asteroids, ships, everything. So when they encounter a planet, they completely reduce it to its bedrock. In addition, the hive fleets are called splinters because they're tendrils or portions of the greater Hivemind itself, which is just fucking absolutely terrifying. Lastly, not only does it have psychic abilities, but it projects its own psychic null field, kind of like the Omegas, right? Or Megons that knock out telepathic communication, psychic abilities, and other means of using the warp. I mean, it took an entire planet of Eldar to channel all of their power, devouring the most powerful ones in the process, to get a single message out of a craft world that was besieged by a hive fleet. Holy crap. In addition, the Hivemind is incorruptible by the warp. I mean, it kills more than the followers of Khorne, yet there's no skulls to take because they're thrown into the Tyranid broth. Nurgle can't tempt it with immortality, Slaanesh can't tweak the mind in his nipples, and Tzeentch can't manipulate a mind that has no plan. So the Hivemind might not be the master of mind bullets, but as far as using its extremely wide-sweeping psychic abilities, woof, it's there. Moving on though, our number 4 slot is occupied by a Grey Knight, a Grandmaster no less, Algebric Voldus, the Warden of the Librarius of the Third Brotherhood of Grey Knights. Let's talk about our Grey Bros for a second here. They're the militant arm of the Ordo Malleus, one of the 3 orders of the Inquisition. Ordo Malleus pertaining to demons, Ordo Xenos to the all forms of alien, and Ordo Hereticus to your witches and heretics. Now, for the most part, they're all relative Psykers, compared to normal Marines at least. Part of what makes them so terrifying to demons is that they've turned their faith into a sort of bastion for their soul, protecting them from chaos corruption. Some books regard it as like their faith is like a diamond in the center of their soul. It's really interesting to read some of the earlier Grey Knights book that kind of really fluff up and romanticize that faith bastion. Now, Voldus is the Mac Daddy of them all. The lore regards him as the strongest Psyker that the Grey Knights have seen in centuries. With that being said, though, Voldus doesn't have a ton of instances where he throws entire planets made of cheese while laughing his Psyker ass off. He's more of a combat Psyker, using his abilities to bolster his battle brothers while smiting demons into oblivion. I like to picture something out of Ghostbusters where he blows Nurgle demons up into gigantic waves of green goo, but to each their own. What makes Aldrich such a standout character is that he was recently promoted to Grand Master after the death of Dorium Nerathim at the hands of the Lord of Change, Makachin. the ordeal sent Brother Voldus into the Psyker equivalent of a berserker rage, like just full-on Super Saiyan here, unleashing the full force of his psychic abilities on Macachin. He channeled so much righteous faith and power into attacking the demon that it summoned up Grandmaster Kaldor Drago from the Warp to aid his brother in a rocking air guitar double solo. And the two deftly banished Macachin, and Drago promoted Voldus to the spot on the spot to Grandmaster before disappearing into the Nether. We can go into a whole bunch about Kaldor Drago, but it's better not talked about in this video. In addition to all of that, Voldus is instrumental in the Siege of Hera, the resurrection of Robert Guilliman, and the subsequent Terran Crusade to bring the Emperor's wayward son back to Terra the entire time, using his mind bullets and overwhelming faith to purge the heretic. Now our third slot goes to Varo Tigurius, the Chief Librarian of the Ultramarines chapter. And this was a tough choice, as the third slot can easily be comprised of any of the Chief Librarians from any chapter really. Njal, Ezekiel, Mephiston, Severin Loth of the Red Scorpions, all of them are strong in their own way. But I went with Tigurius because he has the strongest Psyker in the Imperium moniker attached to his fluff. Well, because he's an Ultramarines, but that is what it is. But Varo has been an impressive Psyker from even an early age, gifted with premonition, which is extremely rare for Psykers. I mean, especially Ultramarines here. Some chapters are a little more prone to that, like Blood Angels or Night Lords, but even then it's rare in those chapters. And this premonition has given Tigurius the upper hand on almost every ordeal that he's come against in his life, progressing through the ranks of the Ultramarines Librarius all the way up to Chief Librarian. I mean, hell, this dude even melded with the Hivemind without getting his brain turned into a Space Marine-sized fun pack of pudding. He's the real deal. And because of his precognitive abilities, Macragge has been able to deflect Tyranid invasion after Tyranid invasion. Even the Plague Wars didn't stop the Ultra Smurfs. That was really more because of Guilliman's resurrection than Varo, but if it weren't for his approval of the Inari and Belisarius Crawl, I'm sure that the Loyalists wouldn't have been able to resurrect the Primarch in time. Which is, again, a whole big thing on its own. But being able to tell time, I mean, the future, isn't Tigurius' only ability, though. In close combat, Tigurius is able to channel his psychic abilities, magnifying his physical prowess and martial abilities tenfold, turning him from a calm and collected individual to an incarnate of the Emperor's wrath. And Tigurius was able to 6v1 with a bunch of Chaos Sorcerers, using his amplified psychic hood, which has the most badass name ever, the Hood of Hellfire, to help aid him in defeating the Sorcerers, consuming each one in fire as they struggled against the Ultramarine. Now our second slot belongs to Warhammer's own Hugo Weaving, Eldred Ulthran, the High Farseer of Ulthwé. And you thought I was kidding, didn't you? I mean, that's the spitting image of Agent Smith himself. I can almost hear him asking me to throw the One Ring into the fires of Mordor. Shit. Back on track. Eldred Ulthran is our first Eldar on this list, and while they probably deserve a bigger presence here, the lore does a poor job of really representing the most psychically gifted race. Often Eldar Farseers and Warlocks are kind of foiled just in time, and they take this more of a back seat to the over-the-top bro handshake of the Space Marine Librarians. But Eldred, though, is old. Very old. So old that it's believed that he was friends with the Emperor at one point before Eldrad stole the Emperor's Nintendo Switch, and they haven't talked since. I mean, he's one of the oldest Eldar in existence, and even rumored to possibly be the Phoenix Lord of the Witch Path. At least that's kind of where Games Workshop is leading things up to be. I mean, on that note, he completely overhauled what it means to be a Farseer, moving it from the ancient art of simple foresight into the kind of guides of the Eldar race that they are today. I mean, Jane Czar even remarks that she knows when she's in the presence of another immortal. Now, Eldred isn't on this list because he's some freak psyker. He's on this list because of his mastery of manipulating the strands of fate. He has woven himself throughout the storyline of almost every major arc, using his scrying abilities to prevent entire craft worlds from destruction, admittedly causing the Second War of Armageddon, but still. But a lot of his efforts they've seemed failed or entirely misguided, like his actions during the War of the Beast by sending a squad of Harlequins into the Imperial Palace itself, which may or may not be the only way he could have convinced them to increase their defenses against webway breaches, because they're aliens, and when's the Imperium ever going to listen to Eldar? In addition, This creates two additional branches of the Inquisition, the Ordo Xenos and the Ordo Malleus, which we talked about earlier. So there's a subtle genius to his actions. There's no way that they would have listened to an Eldar, like I said, and he knew that the webway in the Imperial Palace was undefended and weak, and he knew that chaos was the bigger threat. By having these Harlequins relay that, hey, you're fighting orcs, but chaos is really the big threat here, they said, oh shit, how these aliens get in here? We gotta fight chaos, and alien orcs are attacking us. Thus, Ordo Xenos and Ordo Malleus are born. But throughout the story, Eldred uses his mastery of the warp and fate to aid Imperial ships traveling through the warp, or even is instrumental in helping to resurrect Aeneid, the elder god of the dead, who in turn uses Ivrain as his conduit that then resurrects Robert Guilliman. I mean, let it be said that Eldred is a monumental cock, though. I mean, he'll do whatever it takes to preserve the Eldar race. And his argument is always, what's a million of a race in the trillions, humans, versus the dying light that is the Eldar. And he does realize that the two races are intertwined and actively fights chaos, either wielding the Imperium unknowingly or alongside him. And it's kind of crazy. I think that's really what created that initial friendship with the Emperor. Is like, hey, I'm trying to end chaos. Do you, Eldred, want to help me out? Sure, let's do it. Fist bump, Emperor. Now, Vero Tigurius might launch some major psychic attacks, but Eldred himself is not known for that. More, he is known for being a bow staff master, with his staff of Ulthamar being the chief Farseer of Ulthwé, well, at least was. And to that end, he single-handedly defeated Abaddon in a one-on-one duel that made the Desweller look like a child. And the distinction being that Eldred isn't going to destroy your head with mind lightning so much as reach through fate and time to push things just a little, so that maybe a piano falls on you, or you trip up at the moment of confrontation with the Master Farseer. Number 1 belongs to, in my mind, well fucking duh, that's why he's on this list, but in my mind, the strongest current Psyker in the universe, Ozek Ironman of the Thousand Suns Legion. I put Varro and Eldred on this list almost entirely to justify Ironman as number 1. Varro is great at mind lightning and amazing psychic feats, and Eldred is the master of fate weaving. Now Ironman has a mastery of all the above. In addition to that, he knows sorcery, which is outside Psyker abilities and requires a whole mess of sacrifices, unanswered interstellar penis pictures, and other crafty ways to commune with the forces of chaos. Ozek himself was second to Magnus in the Thousand Suns Legion, meaning he learned from Ol One Eye, carrying the Book of Magnus, which is this massive tome of every spell that Magnus could gather during the Great Crusade. I mean, reading that thing alone is going to give him a huge leg up on any other Psyker on this list. So Ironman's biggest claim to fame is the ritual that's named after him, the Rubric of Ironman. The Thousand Suns used to suffer from basically like Zechian melanoma that was rapidly killing off and changing members of the Legion. The Rubric was Ironman's answer to this. The result was not as planned. Rather than saving the Legion, it sealed every Marine in their armor, turning their bodies to dust and making them soulless automatons, controlled by the many sorcerers of the Legion. Now this pisses off Magnus, but this is massive, squeaking, half Psyker, half spell here. And that's something that few other Psykers in the universe have even touched on, let alone accomplished. And he even went so far as to do a second rubric to try and fix what he did, which actually resurrected Magnus, which is, again, another amazing feat in and of itself. So throughout the lore, though, Ironman has a pretty awesome tale. You get this Legionnaire that still will do whatever he can for his brothers, which is rare in Chaos Space Marines. And the Ironman books are incredible and really paint a tragic portrait of the fall of the Red Sorcerer of Magnus. And we see his love for his brothers when he casts the Eldar Triumvirate outside of the Webway during the Gathering Storm series, and this would have undoubtedly killed them. But Ivrain offers to restore his Rubric Marines by bringing 12 back to life in exchange for their lives. And Ironman is visibly overcome with emotion on this, and he agrees. Like it makes the illusion that he's crying. And Ivrain double crosses him and bounces, but still, we see that he's still in there. In some of the books, it talks about how he's destroyed the more nobler portions of his mind and the nobler portions of his psyche. I mean, even some of the other people, like he thinks himself still untainted and pure in the way that things were during the fall of Prospero. But he's kind of delusional in that he is changing. He's lived in the Eye of Terror for 10 millennia. He has got to change with that. And that's how we kind of see this character go from how do I redeem my faction to how do I save my brothers, and I'm clearly a villain now. And Ahriman's chief goal is to gain entry into the Black Library of Chaos, to learn all he can about Tzeentch and possibly supplant him or create himself as another god, which he calls the War Against Fate. And there's that whole villain thing coming back right there, huh? About the War Against Fate. But now this could be as Tzeentch plans, since he's all about the long game, but so is Ahriman. He's pulled the strings as a puppet master of the Prodigal Sons warband for 10 long millennia. In addition to his mastery of the dark arts, his potent psychic abilities, as well as one of the coolest chaos models to date. Strictly looking at his psychic abilities on the tabletop, in every edition prior to this one, he was disgustingly strong. But that's more of a discussion about how the 8th edition deals with Psykers now and kind of bastardizes them. But I could go on and on about Ahriman, but every other Psyker on this list is relative child's play to the ambition of Ahriman. His desire to preserve his brothers and his passion for becoming a god. I mean, you can make an argument about Eldred having like a long play to kill chaos with the Golden Throne, but that's a huge theory and not like an actual thing that's written down or anything. But I'd love to hear what you guys think on this, though. I know that maybe you'd like to have seen the Chaos Sorcerer Kaan on this list as well, or in addition, or in replacing Ahriman, since he was able to bring Horus to his knees. Or, I'm sorry, not a clone of Horus, or a bevy of other ones. And this was really a very hard subject to tackle, since Psyker abilities are so relative. But before we close this video out, I just want to give an honorable mention to the Lord of Death himself, Mephiston. Because I'm a Blood Angels player, I need my personal bias in here, right? So this guy is so fucking beyond badass. He is overcome by the Black Rage, the affliction of the Blood Angels, where they kind of relive the last moments of Sanguinius' life, lost in the memories of their long-dead Primarch. So Mephiston, after being under rubble for 6 days, like a whole building falls on him, wills himself out of the Black Rage, coming out of the rubble as Mephiston, Lord of Death, then single-handedly kills an entire orc warband. I mean, Mephi rocks so much hard rock air guitar that he was able to hold his own against Kabanda, the greater demon of Khorne that went toe-to-toe with Sanguinius. I mean, albeit he was given strength by his Legion Librarian bros, but it still stands the testament of the gigantic balls attached to Mephiston's already huge balls. But that concludes our video here today. Hopefully you had this little fun foray down the top 5 Psykers, and I apologize if you don't agree with this list. Like I said, it is really open to conjecture. It is super subjective. It's very just what book did you read, which edition did you read, and who do you think is part of your top 5? But from as much of the research I could gather, this was the top 5 that I really could say is gonna be in at least everyone's top 5 list in some way or another. But as always, guys, thanks so much for watching here today. Love to hear what your thoughts are on this, so go ahead and comment below, like, subscribe, all that kind of action. But have a good one and take care.